Welcome to the FSMA Produce Safety Rule Refresher Course, Module 3, Wildlife and Domesticated Animals and Land Use. These refresher modules provide an overview of the key requirements of the FSMA Produce Safety Rule. They are meant for those who have already attended a training course as a reminder of the key elements of the rule. These videos will not provide you with a certificate of completion and are not a replacement for attending a FSMA Produce Safety Rule training. The third module is a summary of the requirements for wildlife, domesticated animals, and land use. Animals are a natural part of the growing environment, but all animals and their manures carry the potential to cause human illness. This module will cover wildlife and domesticated animals such as birds, deer, dogs, and cats, their risks, and how to reduce risks associated with animals. It will also cover land use and the risks related to adjacent land use. First, it is important to note that the FSMA Produce Safety Rule recognizes that wildlife is a valuable part of the landscape and the farm environment. Destroying the habitat that animals live in can actually make wildlife problems worse on the farm. Co-management means farmers can conserve and protect natural resources and protect food safety. The FSMA Produce Safety Rule does not require farmers to remove wildlife habitat or animals from the farm. Focus on preventative measures to minimize risks while allowing for both conservation and food safety practices. Why are animals a potential risk to food safety? Animals and their feces can carry human pathogens, which can contaminate fruits and vegetables. It is important to know what type of wildlife risks your farm has. Do you have migrating birds in the spring and fall? Do you have significant deer pressure on one side of the field but not the other? Pay attention to where animals are so that you can understand the risks. What does the FSMA Produce Safety Rule require related to wildlife on the farm? The rule requires that farms that are subject to the rule assess the growing area during harvest to see if there is contamination from animals. This might be feces, crop destruction, chewing, footprints, or other indications that there have been wildlife present. If significant evidence of contamination is present, you must evaluate if the produce can be harvested. The Produce Safety Rule requires that any produce that is reasonably likely to be contaminated must not be harvested. All employees must be trained to not harvest any produce that may be contaminated. What should you do when you find feces or other contamination from animals in the field? The Produce Safety Rule does not indicate the size of a no-harvest buffer zone around contamination, as this will vary widely. The size of the buffer will depend on many factors, such as how the plant is growing, age of contamination, and other factors. For example, if fecal contamination is found, you might use the following factors to determine the area to not harvest: size of fecal contamination, age of fecal contamination, type of crop and if it grows close to the ground, climate factors such as recent rain. Remove the contamination from the field as needed to reduce risk. There are many strategies to keep wildlife out of the field, which could include fencing, netting, or noise or visual deterrents that scare wildlife away. Which strategies you decide to use will depend on what wildlife you are dealing with, your field layout, and other factors. The Produce Safety Rule does not require a farmer to use any specific animal exclusion strategies. Domesticated animals such as dogs, cats, and livestock are also common on farms. These animals can pose a risk in the same way that wild animals can, and their feces can contain pathogens that can cause human illness. Keep your pets out of the growing areas and pack sheds. If livestock or pets are present on the farm, the Produce Safety Rule requires that farms control their feces to ensure that it does not contaminate the produce. It is a good idea to instruct customers and visitors to leave their pets at home. It is also important to assess the risks related to adjacent land, as runoff can pose a risk to your fields. Review the topography of your land to determine if nearby land poses a risk to your fields. For example, assess if there are areas that are prone to flooding, runoff from nearby fields or streams, septic tanks, or other sources of contamination near the produce fields. Using a map to locate and document these risks can be useful. This visual tool can help you assess risks and take preventative measures. Consider installing a berm to divert runoff or choosing to plant crops that are not fruits or vegetables. Here's a summary of this module. Wild and domesticated animals can carry pathogens that can cause human illness. Do your best to keep animals out of the growing areas. Anyone harvesting produce must be trained to assess the fields to avoid harvesting produce that may be contaminated from animals. Do not harvest any produce that has visible contamination on it. Assess risks from nearby and adjacent lands and take steps to minimize this risk. This has been the Wildlife and Domesticated Animals and Land Use module of the FSMA Produce Safety Rule refresher course. Find links to resources in the description and be sure to watch all of the other modules in this refresher course.